lasted 500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I have fed species greater than you, and I have starved species greater than you. My oceans, my soil, my flowing streams, my forests, they all can take you or leave you. How you choose to live each day, whether you regard or disregard me, doesn't really matter to me. One way or the other. Your actions will determine your fate, not mine. I am nature. I will go on. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
Climate change. It's real, it's serious, and it's up to us to solve it. In the last 2 decades, we've experienced 14 of the hottest 15 years on record. By 2050, drought and chronic water shortages could impact 1 billion people, while millions more will be at risk from coastal flooding. It can seem overwhelming, but there's reason for hope. If we embrace solar and wind power to their full potential, we can cut the world's yearly carbon emissions by 1/3. Already, Germany generates 27% of its electricity from renewables, with a goal of 80% by 2050. Denmark has shown it can produce more wind energy than it can use, and England is building the world's biggest offshore wind farm. Communities large and small are taking steps. A new public building in Mexico City has an exterior that breaks down air pollutants, erasing the effects of 1,000 cars each day. Paris installed street tiles that harvest energy from foot traffic. Other cities are paving streets with smog-eating concrete and sidewalks with recycled materials. Individuals can make a difference too, through the choices we make every day. If every American driver drove 10 miles less each week, it could eliminate more than 100 billion pounds of carbon from the air each year. New innovations are making important strides possible, and more are on the way, but we can't wait. Reimagining our world's energy future will take a shared sense of urgency from countries, companies, cities, and all of us. Working together, real change is possible. Learn more at natgeo.com/climate.
Makakalikasang araw po. Once again, it is third Friday of the month, Kamayan Forum Day. We will begin our program with a Zoom etiquette to be followed by an opening prayer and the Philippine National Anthem. Moreover, we are currently live streaming on our Green Convergence GCFP page. Thank you. Sir John.
Yes po. Let's start po. Okay
Yes
po.
po.
Together in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Ever loving Father, we glorify you for your goodness and gracious heart. We thank you for the gift of life you have bestowed upon us. Next. We thank you for all your creation we have been living a life of possibility through your grace. Thank you for the trees and the mountains, the sea and the land, the animals, the bird, and everything you have created. Thank you for granting us stewardship of your creation, that we may glorify your name through our deeds and our intentions. Thank you for the spirit of boldness and compassion that strengthen us to protect and conserve your creation. Lord, we pray for your forgiveness for our sins and shortcomings. We ask your forgiveness and pray for your guidance and in our weakness. May you give us strength to continue our mission on environmental advocacies despite the challenges we may encounter. We ask that you open the heart of people and fill their hearts with love and compassion, that they may turn away from selfish and deceitful deeds towards the environment. We pray that always fill our hearts with hope and remind us to continue our environmental pursuits not only for our sake, but for the sake of the future generation to come. May the green convergence we continues blessed with the servants who are passionate to protect and conserve nature. We pray that this webinar be filled with wisdom and knowledge that we may use to serve you. We ask for your guidance and all agenda sets for this webinar, that we may be fruitful in our mission for the environment. May your love strengthen us in this journey. We are your servant and your stewards, we pray. In the name of our gracious Lord, Amen.
Amen.
Kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiliw, telas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mong bangaw, ay hinagang tula, kawin sa paglayang minamahal. Ang islang ng katawan mo'y tagumpay na naghihingi, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidinig. Luma ng araw ng walang pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang inigaya na pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Thank you, John David Claustro, President of Kabataang Katuwang, sa mapagpalayang, nawala yung aking, wait a minute, wait lang. Sa mapagpaunlad at produktibong inisyatibo or kakampi for the opening prayer. You know, I actually gave the introduction, but I didn't notice that I was muted. So I'm sorry for that. Good afternoon po. Isang makakalikasan, mainit, at masayang pagbati sa inyong lahat. Maayong hapon na imbaga malam, Welcome to the monthly Kamayan para sa Kalikasan Forum. As always, as Maribeth, our host, said, since March 1990, third Friday is Kamayan Day. This is our 397th episode, brought to you by Green Convergence for Safe Food, Healthy Environment, and Sustainable Economy, or GC for short, and Kamayan Restaurant. In case you missed the announcement earlier, we are currently live streaming at the Green Convergence Facebook page. A video recording will be uploaded later to the GC website and the GC YouTube channel. Do you hear me clearly?
Loud and clear.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. I have a sore throat, so I can't really throw out my voice for fear of losing it completely. I am your moderator, Marie Marciano, a founding director and former vice president of GC, and a lifetime advocate and volunteer of various and many causes, particularly for environmental protection, justice, and human rights. And now it's time to welcome our co-moderator. He used to be a regular participant of Kamayan Forum and a long-time environmental protection advocate, and has recently been elected to the GC Board of Trustees. And here he is, David D'Angelo. Hello, David. Welcome.
Hello, Marie. Maraming salamat. Mga kalikasang hapon po sa inyong lahat at napakaganda ng pag-uusapan natin today, no, Marie? Kasi ito tungkol sa plastic. Kasi, diba tayo, ayaw natin ng plastic na kaibigan. So, siyempre sa environment, dapat ayaw din natin. Acknowledge lang natin, Marie, bago tayo magsimula, no? Yung mga participants natin today. First and foremost, we would like to thank the presence of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Kasama natin sila today. Maraming salamat po. Andito rin yung kakampi. Napaganda ng acronym na, kakampi. Kakampi ng kalikasan.
Yeah.
Of course, we have people from University of Batangas, the Foundation for Media Alternatives, De La Salle University, Haribon Foundation, the Immaculate Heart of Mary College, Parañaque, Green Architecture Advocacy Philippines, Inc., Environmental Science Society, the Prelature of Infanta, Community Organization of the Philippines. Wow, Infanta Quezon, tayo ha. Cocolate Movement, Rotary Club of Cagayan de Oro East Urban, Iligan Medical Center College, USTP, ESS, Philippine Normal University, Zero Waste, Philippine Inventor Society. Ito mga kailangan natin, mga inventor. Lasallian Institute for the Environment, sino ba? Sea-Rise, yan. Zero Waste Philippines Inc., Eco Waste Management Company, Survivors Hub, UP Integrated School, ayan, DNR, siyempre, United Recyclers Organization of the Philippines, sino ba? CTKMC ULP. At Ako Ang Bukas, yan mamaya malalaman natin. Ano ba yung Ako Ang Bukas?
Ako Ang Bukas.
Congregation of the Franciscan Sisters of the Sacred Heart, Daughters of Charity, Franciscan Sisters of the Sacred Heart, OLPP Public Affairs Ministry, Santa Elena High School, Pure Oceans, at dun sa mga hindi ko pa po namin nababanggit. Naku, welcome
Nabanggit
po sa
mo ba ang
Kamayan
Haribon,
Forum.
David?
Yes, Haribon Foundation. This is a long-time environmental
And of course,
advocate.
the trustees of Green Convergence.
Yes, siyempre. Sa mga kasama natin sa Green Convergence. Nakalimutan natin pa sa lawatan yung sarili natin mga kasama natin.
Alam mo,
Welcome po sa Kamayan Forum.
yes, we are so happy to see the old, the regulars, and the newcomers. No? Sana yung mga ngayon lang dumating, we'll make it a habit to be with us every third Friday of the month to learn more about what we need to do for the environment. Alam mo, David, natutuwa ako dun sa mga acronym like kakampi. Napansin mo ba? Nakakaaliw. Alam mo, ang Pilipino, ang galing-galing gumawa ng mga acronym. Kakampi.
Alam mo, mas totoo lang sa mga tinatawag na organizational development workshops, the longest time being allocated is actually trying to find out a name for an organization. Alas minsan, isang araw yan. Pero napaka-interesting ng mga kasama natin. At saka, Maria, masanay ka na sa akin. Mukhang yung ating mga kasama sa GC, ako na yung pa-partner sa'yo palagi.
Well, that's not bad. That's good. Okay,
Yeah, I'm
welcome
happy
yun.
to do so.
Okay, so let's move on, David. To start the ball rolling, we have the president of Green Convergence, a Mary Knoll sister who is concurrently the executive director of the Environmental Studies Institute of Miriam College. She also happens to be a CPA and took a master's program on environment, peace, and security at the University of Peace in San Jose, Costa Rica, a learning institution established by the United Nations. I am proud to present Sister Marvi Misolas.
Thank you very much, Marie. And I would like to say good afternoon and welcome to our speakers and participants of this 397th, wow, Kamayan Forum. So our topic this afternoon, beat plastic pollution is vital in our discussion with climate change and pollution. So what can I say about plastic pollution? It is, especially the marine plastic pollution, is one of the crises threatening our planet. Historically, the first totally synthetic plastic material was developed by Dr. Leo Baekeland in New York in 1905 from the reaction of phenol and formaldehyde to produce phenol formaldehyde resin. For us Filipinos, plastic pollution started as early in the 1970s when manufacturers started to use single-use and throw-away packaging. According to one report, plastic pollution was first noticed in the oceans by scientists who were conducting a study of plankton. If not abated, there would be more plastics than fishes in the ocean by 2050. Plastic pollution and carbon-intensive development are interrelated. Plastics are a byproduct of the oil industry. In a CNBC interview, Judith Ink, the founder and president of nonprofit advocacy group called Beyond Plastics, is saying that plastics is the plan B for fossil fuel industry. And why is that? Because she said plastics which are made from fossil fuel are said to drive nearly half of oil demand growth by mid-century, according to International Energy Agency. That outpaces even hard to decarbonize sectors like aviation and shipping. The report also quoted Alan Gilder of Wood Mackenzie forecast that every year through 2050, there will be 10 million metric tons of growth in the market for petrochemicals, which are used to make plastics and other products. He said that most of these plastics will be shipped to developing countries, like the Philippines. Now, the Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia are the top countries for the production of large municipal solid waste at 1.14 kilogram per capita per day. This was a study done in 2021. So we really have a huge work to do, all of us. We must make peace with nature. We must refuse more plastics and go to zero waste. Thank you, and let us have a substantive discussion.
Thank you, Sister Marvi.
Thank you, Sister Marvi.
You know, we've changed the old format of the forum a bit. Now we only have two major parts. During the first part, we shall listen to all the presentations of our resource speakers, and we are not going to ask them questions at that point. Part 2 is the open forum where your questions will be directly answered by the resource speakers. So that's it. I hope that's clear. And David, I think you have some guidelines for the participants.
Yes, Marie, in order to maintain the forum flow and good discussion, we would like to remind everyone, number one, to avoid the distracting ambient noise. All participants are requested to keep your microphone on mute for the duration of the webinar, except during the open forum when participants are welcome to speak and ask questions. And second, meantime, you may use the chat box for comment, reactions, or messages. So kung medyo na-touch kayo sa sinasabi o nag-agree kayo, you can use the reaction during the time of the speaker. Marie, let's start with our first speaker for this afternoon.
Okay, salamat sa'yo, Randy. Tuloy na tayo sa ating portion 1. Our first speaker is a consultant of Asian Development Bank, or ADB, and outreach manager of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law. She is also a part-time lecturer at De La Salle University and serves as Plastic Solutions Campaigner of Eco Waste Coalition since 2021. Let's give a warm welcome to Ms. Colleen Salamat. Hi, Colleen.
Hello, good afternoon po sa lahat. Mag-share lang
Good
po ako ng
afternoon.
screen. And apologies for any background noise kasi umuulan po sa area namin.
Okay,
Ayan.
sure.
Okay. Ayan. To start po, Eco Waste Coalition is actually a network of community, church, school, environmental, and health group with a common goal to end wasting through promotion of environmental justice and stewardship. So, ang in-advocate din namin is to have a zero waste Philippines, of course. And nag-start po yung Eco Waste dahil nagkaroon ng Payatas landfill incident. If maaalala niyo po, 23 years ago, nung tuloy-tuloy po yung pag-ulan sa Quezon City, nangyari po tong Payatas landfill incident that buried more than 200 people alive. And it was only during the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken, in 2021, na nagkaroon po ng ruling ang Municipal Trial Court ng Quezon City, holding the Quezon City government liable on this. So ito po yung nag-push ng pagpasa ng tinatawag natin ng RA 9003 or Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. So this is a very comprehensive law that provides the programs, creating necessary institutional mechanisms and incentives, and nagde-declare din po ito ng mga prohibited acts and penalties on solid waste management. So sa Eco Waste po, kasama namin sa project is ang Greenpeace, also Gaia or Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, Healthcare Without Harm, and kasama rin po namin ang Mother Earth Foundation. So on our end, what we're working is to have policies that protect the country from plastic pollution and prevent policies that promote false solutions. So later po, i-discuss ko po sa inyo kung ano-ano po yung mga tinatawag natin na false solutions when it comes to addressing the plastic crisis. And this is from the 2019 study of our colleagues from Gaia, or Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, and it found out that Filipinos use more than 163 million sachet and 93 million sando and labo bags daily, which is equivalent to billions and billions of plastics every year. This is just this is just sachet, sando, and labo bags alone. Wala pa po dito yung mga cutleries and even bubble wraps kasi 'di ba during the lockdown sobrang dumami rin yung mga bubble wraps natin with the deliveries online. And from that, the latest data that we have is from the DNR, and the statement from our Secretary Loizaga saying na from 16,000 in 2016, ngayon nasa 61,000 na po yung single-use plastic waste generation every day. So imagine kung gaano po ito kadami. It's actually in metric tons, sorry. So kung dati po nung 2019 or before pandemic, ganito usually yung mga nakikita nating reports. It's usually our marine animals or like whales and dolphins being na napagkakamalan yung mga plastics as fish or as food nila. So, ang tendency nito, of course, nag-accumulate din sa kanilang stomach and nagiging cause of their deaths. But now we've changed. We've noticed a change in narrative that plastics is not just an oceans issue, but climate as well. So I'm gonna be showing a short video on the story of plastic.
You've probably heard about a giant trash island in the ocean. Or that poor sea turtle and the straw. Maybe you've even heard how plastic is being found inside the fish we eat. The plastic crisis gets a lot of attention, but the headlines usually focus on the plastic that ends up in the environment. And that's just part of the story. The truth is, plastic has a whole life cycle that's hidden from view, one that harms people and the planet from start to finish. Let's start at the beginning. Plastic is made from fossil fuels like oil or fracked natural gas. Extracting those fossil fuels and turning them into plastics creates a lot of pollution. Pollution that most often affects marginalized communities nearby. As we've gotten better about using less oil and gas to power our lives, the fossil fuel industry found a lifeline in plastics. In fact, oil and gas companies are doubling down on plastic production, with plans to build or expand over 300 petrochemical plants in the US alone by 2025. But these companies already produce more plastic than we can use. So where's all that plastic going? A lot of it's flowing into new markets, in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Because more than any other product category, plastic isn't driven by the demand for it, but by the supply. Corporations like Unilever, Nestle, and Procter & Gamble are aggressively marketing single-use plastic products around the world. These companies go to places like Indonesia, where I live, and push their products onto communities that just aren't prepared to deal with all that plastic. Maybe they're used to using natural packaging. Maybe they live on a tiny island without a system of waste collection. And on top of that, countries in the global north are shipping their own plastic waste into these countries too. When you add that all up, it's no wonder so much of this plastic ends up in the environment. And globally, that's where a whopping 32% of plastic packaging ends up. 40% goes to a landfill, where plastic just piles up for future generations to deal with. And 14% is incinerated. Incineration is a nasty business, producing toxic smoke and fly ash. These super expensive facilities depend on plastic to burn everything else. It is oil and gas after all. So they want to see more plastic, not less. Then there's recycling. Unfortunately, it's not the solution that many people think it is. Just 14% of plastic packaging gets recycled, and only 2% is effectively recycled, meaning it becomes something as useful as before. The rest is downcycled into something worse. And most recycled plastic is only recycled once before ending up in landfills, incinerators, or the environment anyway. So it turns out that we can't burn, bury, or recycle our way out of this problem. And we can't just scoop all that plastic out of the environment either. That's like trying to bail out a bathtub with a teaspoon while the tap is on full blast. So how about we turn off the tap by shutting down the plastic machine? That means passing policies that create systemic change, like phasing out the single-use plastics that pollute the most, ending the fossil fuel subsidies that are fueling big plastic, and holding companies responsible for the plastic waste they create. That's how we can achieve our vision of a zero-waste future, where all of our products and packaging can be reused or repaired, effectively recycled or composted, and ultimately how we create a sustainable, circular economy that works for both people and the planet. Visit store. You've probably heard about a giant trash.
As stated po in the video, yun nga po, from like the pollution angle, ngayon nakikita na natin yung plastic na it crosses the triple planetary crisis like climate, even biodiversity loss, and of course pollution, not just the land pollution and oceans, but air as well. Because as stated nga po in the video and from the study from Center for International Environmental Law, they found out that at every stage of the life cycle of plastics, it emits significant amounts of greenhouse gases. So from raw material, fabrication, use, especially in recycling and disposal, nag-emit pa rin siya ng mga ng greenhouse gases. And even at the disposal or recycling level, especially sa mga waste to energy incinerations, mayroong mga dioxins and furans which are considered as POPs or persistent organic pollutants. And recently, just last month, nagkaroon ng very alarming study and findings that in Metro Manila, micro and nanoplastics have already been found in our air. And it's also found not just in lungs, kidneys, but it's even in the blood na from the study in Europe that we have. And that's the problem. It doesn't go anywhere. It's technically everywhere. It never goes away. Ito po yung sachet na baka naabutan pa po ng karamihan sa inyo. Yung design ng ganito ng Unilever and Colgate Palmolive na ganitong klaseng sachet actually is nasa environment pa. And ito naman po from our colleagues in Oceana na this is 1,000 meters deep. I just forgot some trench po to na nila nakita. Pero if you would notice that yung mga plastics na to ay buong-buo pa rin. So hindi po talaga siya nawawala sa ating environment. And there are also studies that it has actually outnumbered the stars in the galaxy by 500 times, and it's both found at the South Pole and North Pole of the Earth. But is it really the fault of Philippines? Like always na lang natatag yung Philippines as the third largest ocean polluter in the world. But actually, sorry, I forgot to include it in the slide. Dinebunk po yun ng Ocean Conservancy. We're one of the groups that have been telling them that it's actually the companies that should be called out for this and not the countries, because sila yung patuloy na nagpo-produce at nagpa-package ng ganitong mga klaseng materials. So with our colleagues in Break Free from Plastics, we're doing brand audits. And sa audits na po yun, we found na it's the same multinational fast-moving consumer goods companies like Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Mondelez, Universal Revena, Colgate Palmolive. So sa Philippines, sila po talaga yung consistent na polluters na what we call. And with that, we actually filed a complaint to the Department of Trade and Industry to Coke, Pepsi, Nestle, Unilever, P&G, and Colgate Palmolive and stuff. Kasi they're labeling their packaging, especially sachet, as recyclable when it cannot be technically recycled. We don't have a facility to recycle these kinds of packaging. So ano ba talaga yung mga dapat nating tinututukan na solutions? Like kanina po minention ko yung tinatawag natin na false solutions versus real solutions. Yung false solutions na tinatawag natin, ito po yung mga quick fix lang. At mahilig nga tayo sa mga ganito na hindi naman talaga naaayos or hindi naman talaga nagkakaroon ng structural change. Napakalalim po ng yung problem natin on plastic is very systematic. That's why the approach that we should do should be real solutions that are systematic, that should prevent that should not just reduce waste, but prevent future waste. So ito po yung tinatawag namin na zero waste hierarchy. And for products and packaging that involves plastic, dapat talaga po dito ang number one na solution is to rethink or redesign. And yung pag-rethink or pag-redesign ng mga packaging or ng systems on plastics should be to reduce and reuse. So ibig sabihin like kagaya po ng mga refill na mga stores, kasi nauuso po yung mga zero waste na stores. Ganun po yung mga models na gusto nating makita. And for biodegradable and compostable waste, next is to recycle or compost in our backyards if kaya. And then at the only time po na mapupunta sila sa material recovery facility, which is mandated by the law that every barangay should have. And then residuals management. So dito lang po yung residual, technically ito po yung mga plastics na hindi pwedeng ma-recycle at yung mga waste na hazardous that have been treated. So sila lang po supposedly yung mga nag-end up sa landfill. At yung mga tinatawag nating false solutions is yung acceptable na waste to energy incineration. So ito po yung mga under the false solutions. You can visit the plasticsolutionsreview.com because there's ito yung super detailed na magbibigay po ng mga in-depth na discussion on false solutions. So we have bio-based plastics, biodegradable and compostable plastics because technically they're still single-use plastics. And next is on chemical recycling, incineration, oxo-degradable, plastic credits, plastic to fuel, and lastly is bioplastics. And why we are saying that recycling is not enough? Because it's a broken system. Like of all plastics have been generated since the 1950s, only 9% has actually been recycled. And these are what we've been seeing from the initiatives of the top polluters mentioned earlier na yun nga, parang sasabihin nila parang 25% is from marine plastics or recycled plastics. And yun talaga yung mga nakikita po natin. Next is the problem on cement kilns. So it's another way of the recycling. It's another of the recycling practices. But according to our DOST, it's actually produces dioxins and furans and more microplastics that even in countries like Spain, here po sobrang mataas po yung cancer mortality nila around cement kiln factories sa mga communities po dito. And ito nga po talaga yung nakikita pa rin natin. And it's really challenging, especially to our local governments, kung saan paglalagyan yung mga ganitong klaseng plastic. So, nag-opt sila to do mga waste, mga ganitong projects. Also, another one is the problem on waste to energy, which what we're calling a waste of energy. Because, for example, in Singapore, it only meets the 3% of the country's total energy demand. And in Dubai, it's only 2%. So it's like less than 5%. But not just that, nadami rin pong problem yung waste to energy when it comes to chemicals and dioxins and furans. And of course, dahil nga ang plastic ay made of fossil fuels, it drives more the production. And even if sabihin na natin na yung mga parang pinaka most advanced technologies, it technically emits higher greenhouse emissions than the common electricity generated through conventional means like fossil gas. So it's really a waste of energy, and it will just add up to our climate crisis. And before, ito yung mga tinatawag natin naman na real solutions. Because before, we didn't have yung mga sachets and all. When we search po ng mga 1940s or 1930s na sari-sari store in the Philippines, it's technically an entire reuse and refill system. So if you would notice na wala po talagang single-use plastic dito. And that's what we're saying, that we really have to go back to basics. Just go back to how it was before. And dahil nga may mga businesses na yan po talaga, and not just at the global level but at the local level, like Human Nature, they also have mga refills na po na stores. I think this is in their SM North na branch. And for Lush, they've converted yung mga shampoo to shampoo bars, conditioner bars, even lotion bars. Meron din po sila. So from our partners in Mother Earth Foundation, eto yung nakuha po nila na kapag nagdadala po pala tayo ng reusable containers, we're avoiding around 54 sachets depending on the material, depending on the product that we're purchasing. So imagine how much sachets we're actually avoiding that goes to the landfills. And our communities are proving that zero waste is really possible. So this is in Zamboanga, where they're using leaves to package yung mga mangoes nila, and in Laguna, in Los Baños, Laguna, where they used yung parang bayong na material for their pizza boxes. Because some junk shops apparently are not accepting po yung mga boxes na may contained na ng oil. And also, our local governments are proving that zero waste is really possible as long as we fully implement the RA 9003 or Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. So San Fernando po in Pampanga is one of our model cities because they were able to have 87% waste diversion rate. So ibig sabihin 87% po ng basura nila yung avoid from going to the landfills because they have sa household level po as in segregated at source na po yung kanilang mga basura. Yung iba po nilang barangay, dalawa yung MRF. So may maayos po talaga silang segregation at material at recovery na processes. And hindi lang po doon may kukwento po pala ako kasi sa SM Pampanga, actually boundary po siya ng Mexico and San Fernando. So pag sa part po kayo ng SM na nasa San Fernando, pwede pa yung bawal yung plastic. So walang mga plastic bags. Pero pag napupunta na sa side ng Mexico, may mga plastic bags na. So ayun din, meron din po silang ban on single-use plastics. Okay, next is we really have to enforce, implement, and defend our environmental laws. Kaya nga po kanina, it's really the implementation of the RA 9003 that proves that zero waste is really possible. And us in Eco Waste Coalition, we filed a case to the Supreme Court because of the waste to energy facilities guidelines that was released by the Department of Environment. And our colleagues also from Oceana also filed a case, a mandamus case, because wala pa rin po tayo ng NEAP or non-environmentally acceptable products and packaging na supposedly ibaban po nun ang single-use plastics. That's why ang ating mga LGUs po, actually more than 500 local government units have ordinances to prohibit single-use plastic. So it's really high time for us to have really strong laws and policies to regulate single-use plastic. But of course, we commend just last year, nagkaroon na po tayo ng Extended Producer Responsibility Act. But of course, it's not enough to address our problem on plastic. So at the global level, I think andito po yung colleague ko si Marian who will discuss more on the ongoing negotiations on global plastic treaty with almost 200 countries that agreed to end plastic pollution towards an internationally legally binding instrument. At the national level, as mentioned for earlier, it's really the enforcement of RA 9003 that prohibits the manufacture, use, importation, and distribution of NEAP and or to pass law to ban single-use plastics. And in nga po, at the local level, meron tayong around more than 500 LGUs. So I guess that's it for my presentation. And invite ko rin po kayo dahil sa Sunday sa Quezon City Circle sa Liwasang Aurora. Dahil nga po plastic-free July ngayon at magkakaroon po kami ng plastic-free July Fair at Liwasang Aurora, Quezon City Circle. So hope to see you po at 10 a.m. at Liwasang Aurora. Ayan. Thank you so much po and have a good afternoon to everyone.
Yun, thank you, Colleen. Napakaganda ng presentation niya, Marie.
Yeah, really.
Interesting, no?
Yeah, it reminds me of my days with Mother Earth Foundation. I was president of Mother Earth Foundation sometime in 2006 to 2009 or 2010. And we were giving zero waste trainings or solid waste management trainings around, and it's really doable. It's a shame that after so long it's still a dream, it remains a dream, but we can't give up on it because it is doable.
Actually, may isang interesting na nakausap ako dati before we proceed. Share ko lang. Sabi niya, pinapalit daw sa plastic pag nag-zero waste ka, yung mga, di ba, bags, paper bags. So if all the people use paper bags, isn't that it results to cutting out more trees? So mamaya siguro itanong natin, no? Hindi ba nagkakaroon din naman ng bagong problema kasi mas maraming puno yung puputulin?
Oo, kaya lang, pagka recyclable naman, hindi ka laging nagkumukuha ng virgin material. So that's di ba?
Mamaya tanong natin sa kanila yan kasi maraming
tapos,
mga
the energy you spend recycling products is less than the energy you spend using virgin materials. So tipid pa rin.
Yan, napakaganda. Now, proceed tayo sa susunod nating speaker to talk about extended producer's responsibility. Dapat sana we would have Asek Gonzalez, the EMB Director of the National Solid Waste Management Commission of the DNR, to be our speaker. Pero in his behalf, we would like to introduce Attorney Ivy Joyce Lanada de Pedro. She is the Attorney 3 Legal Officer of the Pollution Adjudication Board Secretariat Legal Division of the Environmental Management Bureau, DNR. Please welcome again Attorney Ivy Joyce Lanada de Pedro. Welcome, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Isang makakalikasang tanghali po o hapon sa ating lahat. So, I was tasked and assigned on behalf of ASEC Gilbert Gonzalez and AD Esperanza A. Sahul of the National Ecology Center to discuss with you this afternoon the Extended Producer's Responsibility Act of 2022. So let me share my screen first. Ayan, nakikita na po.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this RA 11898, otherwise known as the Extended Producer Responsibility Act of 2022, is an act institutionalizing the extended producer responsibility on plastic packaging waste, amending certain provisions and inserting additional provisions to our mother law, RA 9003, otherwise known as the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. It lapsed into law last July 23, 2022. It was published on July 28, 2022, and became effective on August 12, 2022. Actually, the DNR is mandated to come up and formulate with the implementing rules and regulations of this EPR Act of 2022 within 90 days from the effectivity of the law. Unfortunately, the IRR was signed by the DNR Secretary last January 24, 2023, was published on February 2, 2023, and became effective on February 17, 2023. So before we were able to come up with the IRR, we actually conducted a series of focus group discussions and stakeholders consultations with within the country, no, in Visayas, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, to solicit comments from different stakeholders as regards the proper implementation of this EPR Act of 2022. So again, this EPR Act institutionalizes the extended producer responsibility on plastic packaging waste. As a practical approach to efficient waste management, focusing on waste reduction, recovery and recycling, and the development of environment-friendly products that advocate the internationally accepted principles on sustainable consumption and production, circular economy, and producers' full responsibility throughout the life cycle of their product. The Act requires large companies to adopt and implement policies for the proper management of plastic packaging waste. It was crafted in response to the clamor to regulate single-use plastics and their production, importation, and disposal by industry. So it promotes actually the original advocacy of RA 9003, the segregation of waste at source, segregated collection, waste reduction, recovery, and recycling. Of course, this answers, among others, what is the accountability and responsibility of product manufacturers, producers, and importers for the post-consumption waste that is being generated. Because as we know, product producers are actually, the primary concern of product producers are actually selling their product. And what happens afterwards to the plastic packaging waste that they generated, medyo that is not their primary concern. So to advocate circular economy as one of the key strategies in the prevention, in the National Plan of Action for the Prevention of Marine Litter, of course, this is one of the answers. Well, this is not the only solution. It is an important enabler to accelerate our transition to a circular economy. So circular economy is being advocated here for us to shift from our habitual linear economy, our linear economy of take, make, and dispose. But to advocate circular economy means we have to reintegrate back to the system those plastic packaging that we have used singly, so that we could maximize its use again and again, and creating further value after the full life cycle of that product. Because as we know, actually plastics outlive us. In some studies, plastics remain in the environment for around 300 to 400 years. So imagine that will transmit up to our granddaughters, great-granddaughters, and to our future generations. Of course, in this RA 11898, it also promotes the polluters pay principle, in the sense that for any violation of this RA 11898, it will now be under the jurisdiction of the Pollution Adjudication Board to impose fines and penalties, as against the original RA 9003, wherein the LGUs should enact and impose fines and penalties to the erring persons, for any persons who are violating RA 9003. Dito po, since it is focused on large industries, large enterprises, it will now be the PAB which will impose fines and penalties. It also alleviates some of the ecological solid waste management burdens of the LGUs. So while this law does not directly impose additional duties and responsibilities to our local government units, pwede rin pong ang ating obliged enterprises were given a wide latitude of discretion under this law if they will be partnering up with LGUs. Well, that is their discretion. Pwede naman din with different stakeholders, aggregators, such as the informal waste sector, schools, and other communities. Again, this is circular economy is one of the key strategies for the prevention of marine litter. So in this law, na-reinforce din po ang roles and functions of the National Ecology Center. So the National Ecology Center is originally created under RA 9003. And because of this APR Act, medyo lumawak po yung roles ng National Ecology Center. It gives the National Ecology Center these different functions, additional functions. The National Ecology Center is to be headed by the EMB Assistant Director in her ex officio capacity. Well, the National Ecology Center is mandated to maintain an EPR registry that contains the registered EPR program submitted by the obliged enterprises, maintain and evaluate the compliance of the obliged enterprises and the PROs as regards the registration. The National Ecology Center is also mandated to develop and maintain a database which includes digital formats subject to the provisions on confidentiality, and ensure that the same is reliable, effective, secure, transparent, and accessible to the public. Also, the NEC is mandated to provide an assessment on the volume or footprint of other generated wastes for priority inclusion in the EPR scheme. So while this law, RA 11898, focused only on plastic packaging waste, we will be providing an assessment to be endorsed to our lawmakers so that in the future, other product wastes would be included in the EPR as well. So under this law, the following are responsible to implement EPR programs. So from the earlier presentation, no, it really is the large enterprises which are generating large amounts of plastic packaging waste na naglilinger sa ating water bodies. So this is actually an answer to that, no? That the product producers, which are large enterprises under this law, in reference to the Magna Carta for MSMEs, or the RA 9501 provides that large enterprises whose total assets are more than 100 million pesos, exclusive of the land on which the particular business entity's office, plant, and equipment are situated, are actually responsible to implement EPR programs. So these are further classified into three. A brand owner, so kapag po nakakita tayo ng plastic packaging at nandoon ang pangalan ng industry doon sa plastic packaging na ginamit natin, those plastic packaging falls under the classification na ang kanyang large enterprise ay brand owner. Second classification ay product producers, manufacturers rather, whether directly or indirectly producing their products under their brand. And lastly, importers of consumer goods intended to be sold whether in original packaging or to be repacked for distribution to the general public. So actually, importers are made responsible under this EPR Act because they are the ones responsible for bringing in our country those products that contains plastic packaging waste, which will eventually go to our water bodies. Kaya nga po, di ba, for the prevention of marine litter. So importers are responsible as well to implement EPR programs. As a general rule, the law specifically exempted MSMEs to be covered under this EPR Act, but they are highly encouraged to practice EPR voluntarily because should they transition to become a large enterprise in the future, at least they already know how to implement EPR programs. So as exemption to the exemption, MSMEs in the form of franchises will be considered as obliged enterprises when the total value of assets of all enterprises carrying the same brand, label, or trademark exceeds that of medium enterprises under RA 9501. So yun po ang covered to implement EPR programs under this EPR Act. So plastic packaging covered by the EPR Act are classified into four. Flexibles, the first classification, such as sachets, labels, laminates, and other flexible plastic packaging products, noting that whether it is single layer or multi-layered with plastics or other materials. So whether it is composite, still, if it has plastic content on it, it is covered under the EPR Act. Second classification are rigid plastic packaging products, whether layered with any other materials, which include containers for beverages, food, home, personal care, and cosmetic products, including coverings, caps, or lids, and other necessities such as promotional items such as cutleries, plates, drinking straws, or sticks, tarps, signages, or labels. So tarpaulins under the tarpaulins and signages are classified as rigid plastic packaging products under this EPR Act. Also falling under the classification of plastic packaging are those single-use plastic bags. No? So plastic bags that are being distributed pa rin by the, for example, kumain tayo sa fast food, nag-take out tayo, still they are issuing plastic bags. Well, we commend, of course, those LGUs which has already banned single-use plastics. At any rate, those na nag-i-issue pa rin ng plastic bags, those single-use plastic bags will still form part of the plastic footprint of the industry. And lastly, polystyrene. So meron po tayong 4 na classification of plastic packaging under this EPR Act. Of course, taking into consideration the WACS, Waste Analysis and Characterization Study, so long as it falls under the classification of plastics, definitely plastic packaging po yan. So as provided under Section 44E as inserted by the RA 11898, no, obliged enterprises, collectives, and PROs shall submit and register their EPR programs to the National Solid Waste Management Commission through the department. Of course, it is through the National Ecology Center. Kapag po nagsasubmit ang ating mga obliged enterprises for any questions, inquiries regarding this EPR Act, don't hesitate to call National Ecology Center under the AMB Central Office, and we will be very happy to entertain any of your questions regarding this act. So again, upon the effectivity of the EPR Act of 2022, so that the crucial date is actually August 12, 2022. Within 6 months from that date, that is February 12, 2022, the supposed deadline for the registration of the EPR Act, of the EPR programs of our industries. But to update you, unfortunately, around well, the released list of the Philippine Statistics Authority is that we have around 4,600 large enterprises all throughout the country as of 2021. But as of May 31, 2023, we were only able to receive around 600 applications for EPR registration from our large enterprises. And that figure already includes those voluntary MSMEs which will implement EPR, implement their EPR program. So using this platform, I am asking for your help and cooperation for us to be able to disseminate this further, this law, because marami pa rin pong nagsasabi na obliged enterprises na hindi sila informed kung ano itong EPR Act. And actually, non-registration is one of the offenses under the law. So these are the checklist of requirements. Anyway, this is included in the IRR, and the obliged enterprises, collectives, and PROs could just refer and read the IRR. But the most important thing in these requirements for EPR registration is the EPR program. Kasi po yung iba, they are just submitting letter of intent justifying that they are not covered to implement EPR program. But still, we are looking into their EPR program. So who are responsible to implement EPR program? Actually, there are modes of compliance within the EPR law. Yung kanina, as an individual obliged enterprise, no? So if an industry has assets of more than 100 million, that industry or obliged enterprise may opt to implement its own EPR program individually. Pwede rin naman if those companies falling under the same umbrella, like a group of companies, they may form a collective for them to be able to collectively implement a common EPR program. Kasi sila-sila lang naman yon. Or different companies, different industries may form a PRO, a producer responsibility organization, or they may authorize an already existing PRO for the implementation of their EPR program. As provided under the law, a PRO should serve as a viable platform in the implementation of the EPR program. So a PRO actually is existing, it already knows where to collect waste, who are the people that they have to connect to, sino yung mga LGUs na pwede nila maging partner. So yan po ang role ng isang PRO. And if it will be a PRO which will be registering to us, to the National Ecology Center, only the aggregate of all the member obliged enterprises will be scrutinized by the National Ecology Center, and we will no longer look into the individual plastic footprints of the obliged enterprises. Other possible iterations, so kung ang isang obliged enterprise, for example, is not capacitated to implement its own EPR program on its own, no, it may contract another obliged enterprise or collective or PRO as to become its aggregator and diverter para makapag-implement din part of its EPR program, or totally may inauthorize siyang iba to implement EPR program. And the implementation of this EPR program is actually has two phases, recovery and diversion, specifically sa ating downstream. No? Downstream pertains to those that already leak to the environment once it is consumed by our general public. So the obliged enterprises, collectives, and PROs should design their EPR program for recovery and diversion. Also, the DNR is mandated to come up with the national framework for all types of product waste. But for purposes of formulating the IRR, we inserted this national framework on plastic packaging waste, focused only on plastic packaging waste. So we have upstream measures and downstream measures. So upstream is in the industrial phase pa lang, no, production phase pa lang, wherein we are encouraging obliged enterprises to implement reduction measures of non-environment friendly products in their plastic packaging material. So they may come up with different strategies. So the law actually listed 6 strategies which the obliged enterprises may integrate in their system as part of its EPR program. Ayan, adoption of reusable products or redesign. So yan po itong mga upstream measures will result to reduction of their plastic footprint para po mabawasan yung lalabas na plastic sa ating environment. So yan, inclusion of recycled content, adoption of appropriate refilling systems, viable reduction rates plan, information and education campaign scheme, and appropriate labeling of products. Ang ating downstream measures naman ay product waste recovery programs aimed at effectively preventing waste from leaking to the environment. So ito po yung nakalabas na sa ating mga general consumers ang products ng ating obliged enterprises. So these are the strategies that the obliged enterprises may integrate in their EPR program. Yan, waste recovery schemes through redemption, buyback, offsetting, or any method or strategy that will efficiently result in the high retrievability, high recyclability, and resource recovery of waste products. Diversion of recovered waste into value chains and value-adding useful products through recycling and other sustainable methods. Transportation of recovered waste to the appropriate composting, recycling, or other diversion or disposal sites in the country. Cleanup of waste leaked to the coastal areas, public roads, and other sites. Establishment of commercial and industrial scale recycling, composting, thermal treatment, and other waste diversion or disposal facilities for waste products where investment therein is viable, and partnership with LGUs, communities, and other informal waste sectors. So the operative word here is may. So it's up to the obliged enterprise actually if they want to partner up with the LGUs, communities, and informal waste sectors. And actually, some of the obliged enterprises have already their own mechanism on implementing recovery and diversion. So sample illustration of EPR program flow, ito po yung mga pwedeng i-design ng ating obliged enterprises for them to be able to show the circularity of their plastic packaging waste. So dito po on the left side is actually the upstream measures that they are doing for diversion, and on the right side are our downstream measures. Ito pong nasa gitna on whoever they want to partner up in their recovery. So such as the LGUs, retailers, and outlets with other waste collectors, aggregators, and diverters. Of course, all of these processes should be subject to independent third-party audit. Yan. So actually, ang mantra namin dito whenever we are brainstorming on whether a certain industry is considered an obliged enterprises is for us to follow the brand. So kung ano pong brand yung nakikita natin sa plastic packaging waste, yun po yung susundin natin na kung sino yung obliged enterprises. Ito po yung diniscuss ko kanina for franchise, no? So if we are to take a look at each stall or franchise branches all throughout the country, it may seem that they are MSMEs, but if you take a look at the aggregate amount or total value of the brand all throughout the country, if it is more than 100 million pesos, of course, the head office of that franchise should implement EPR program. As I've said, the most important is the EPR program, and we have 7 components of EPR of the EPR program. So in the specific type of plastic packaging materials, we need to see the enumeration of the brands of that certain obliged enterprise. So brand A, brand B, brand C, brand D, and table number 2 is the aggregate plastic footprint. So depende po ito sa classification. As I presented earlier, so we have 4 classifications. And the target volume or weight of plastic packaging waste for recovery, reuse, and recycling. Actually, this is a moving target because the law provided for specific plastic neutrality targets yearly. Later on, I will present that. Other EPR programs, because other obliged enterprises have already implemented EPR programs even without yet this EPR Act. So that it could be added to their waste diversion accomplishment, they could indicate that in their EPR programs. Of course, labeling, status of implementation, and status of compliance. In the status of implementation, sige. So ito po yung brand, pwedeng maging reference in the presentation of their brands. So just the enumeration of brands and the classification of the plastic packaging products that they are using in their products. So yan, enumeration of the brand, enumeration as well of the plastic packaging products that they are using. For other types of products of packaging products, it is actually a voluntary disclosure on the part of the obliged enterprises because it will help the National Ecology Center in coming up with the assessment on the next in line actually kung ano po yung mga ipopropose namin for inclusion for EPR scheme in the future. Well, of course, we need further legislation para po magkaroon kunwari ng EPR for paper, EPR for carton, EPR for cans. So this is a voluntary disclosure on the part of the obliged enterprises that will greatly help the government in our assessment for inclusion of this other types of product wastes sa EPR schemes in the future. So important things to consider in the components of EPR program. Actually, a lot of industries are asking this because they want to offset or recover those plastics like indiscriminate. They want to recover flexibles only because for cost concerns, no? But the word is respectively, the operative word under the law is respectively. So it's actually if you are, or if the obliged enterprise is generating flexible plastic packaging wastes, they should recover and divert as well flexible plastic packaging wastes. Rigid to rigid, regardless of brand. So this is not brand specific, but class specific. And regardless of content, because some industries are asking, what if their product is actually covered under RA 6969 or the Toxic Chemicals and Toxic and Hazardous Waste Act. So regardless of content, if they want to literally recover those packaging materials, plastic packaging materials they used in their products, of course, it should follow RA 6969 rules. Plastic neutrality does not end with recovery, so we need to see who their diversion partners are, and it should be disclosed in the EPR programs for us to be able to monitor yung kanilang mga diverters. And actually, those diverters will issue the post-recovery diversion certificate to in favor of the obliged enterprises. which will of course be subject to audit. And also we introduced this geographic implementation program or rollout plan in our IRR to achieve that objective on the prevention of marine litter and to ensure that the benefits of various EPR programs go beyond the boundaries of urban centers and cities, no? Kasi nga, di ba, this is one of the key strategies in the prevention of marine litter, and it will defeat the purpose of the law if the obliged enterprises would only focus on the urban area. So this is actually just an example. We are not limiting the capability of the obliged enterprises should they be capacitated to partner up with the farthest coastal barangays as early as 2023. Who knows? But this is just an example or guide on the obliged enterprises kung kanino sila pwedeng makipag-partner up. And this is our plastic neutrality targets as provided by the law. For 2023, it's 20%. So actually, the IRR stated that the plastic footprint target for 2023 is actually self-determined or self-declared. It is up to the obliged enterprise to come up with the figure, but is of course a figure not out of thin air. For them to declare as their plastic footprint by the end of 2023, because the law stated that ang baseline natin should be the immediately preceding year. But because the EPR is still or has just become a law in 2022, then we cannot give 2022 as our baseline. So the IRR stated that as phase-in period pa lang po itong 2023, it is self-determined. At any rate, it will be audited, and the audited 2023 plastic footprint will now be the baseline for the 2024 compliance, which is already at 40%. So for those who will fail to register this 2023, of course, on top of the fines and penalties that may be imposed to them, kapag po halimbawa nag-register sila ng 2026, 60% compliance target na sila. Hindi po tayo babalik sa 20% initially. We also have EPR compliance audit in the law itself to cover 4 aspects of the EPR program implementation. First is the footprint. Second is what you actually recovered and diverted. Next is the determination of the equivalent plastic packaging waste footprint reduction and confirmation of those considered as confidential, declared to be confidential by the obliged enterprises. So obliged enterprises should formulate their own rules, audit rules, pending our formulation of the uniform audit standards. So we will be, the DNR will be formulating uniform standards for auditing this EPR compliance and the procedural manual for this EPR implementation. But pending such issue, once the obliged enterprises should engage at least a certified public accountant to sign their EPR compliance audit report. Incentives, so the law provided as well for incentives in the implementation of this EPR program, and actually the DNR secretary would be in talks with the different national government agencies for us to operationalize these incentives to be provided to individuals, private organizations, and entities that have undertaken outstanding and innovative projects, technologies, processes, and techniques or activities in reuse, recycling, and reduction. Yeah, so this is ongoing. Also, the law provided for fiscal incentives in favor of the obliged enterprises, wherein the costs for the EPR program implementation should be considered as a necessary deductible expense for purposes of computation of the income tax of the obliged enterprise. So for the specific penalties or the specific offenses under this EPR Act, the jurisdiction to impose fines and penalties now lies with the Pollution Adjudication Board. So within 1 year from the effectivity of the EPR-IRR, we will be releasing the rules and procedure for the adjudication of plastic pollution cases and the fine rating system for the offenses under this EPR Act. Ano ba yung mga specific offenses under this EPR Act? So if the obliged enterprise was not able to comply with the required diversion target, that obliged enterprise will be fined with a minimum of 5 million pesos in first offense, or twice the cost of recovery and diversion of its shortfall, whichever is higher. So other offenses includes failure to register, falsification of documents, misdeclaration of generated or recovered footprint, employment of any scheme to maliciously evade the responsibility of an enterprise, and tamper its compliance. So ito po yung range ng penalty for violation of the EPR Act. Again, this only covers those obliged enterprises. So this is one of the gray area under this law actually when we are brainstorming, is the fact that what if it is the waste diverter or the waste collector which has violated the EPR Act, probably falsification of documents, then definitely that will backfire to the obliged enterprise. Again, the obliged enterprises are given a wide latitude of discretion kung kanino po sila makikipag-partner up. So maybe it could be a call to the obliged enterprises as well for them to be careful and very vigilant in choosing kung sino po ang magiging partner nila in waste recovery and waste diversion. That will be subject to audit and subject to compliance monitoring by the National Ecology Center. At hindi naman din po biro itong fines and penalties. Actually, in the third offense, not exceeding 20 million pesos for the third offense and automatic suspension of the business permit until the requirement of the EPR Act is complied with. So some of the frequently asked questions are the EPR IRR and EPR programs cast in stones. So these are expected to be dynamic documents to be revised to adapt to changes as the EPR for plastic packaging develops, matures, and improves. And also, since we have different annual targets on the implementation of EPR program, so kailangan din pong ina-adjust yan ng ating obliged enterprises because their targets, again, 2023 target is self-declared, but for 2024 target, it is the audited 2023. So kung sila ay nagkaroon ng strategies for reduction, mababawasan din yung plastic footprint nila. So meron pong annual targets po yan. Also, gagalaw din po kasi yung pwedeng membership in the collectives and PROs. Kasi nga po, again, it is up to the obliged enterprise kung gusto niyang individual, gusto niyang collective, or gusto niyang under PRO siya. So for example, in the first year, naka-PRO siya. Then eventually, the obliged enterprise thinks na hindi na niya gustong maging under PRO. Kaya na pala niyang mag-isa. So kailangan din niyang mag-amend ng kanyang EPR program kay National Ecology Center. And also, if the obliged enterprise shifted technologies, for example, nag-iba na siya ng diverter, nag-iba na siya ng technology and diversion, ayan, it should be indicated as well in the EPR program. Are the obliged enterprises, collectives, and PROs required to include all the 12 activities na pinakita ko po kanina sa national framework? No, because again, they will adopt, gives the OEs, collectives, or PROs the option as to which of the 12 they will adopt and implement in their EPR program. So yan. Also, does the EPR law impose new duties and responsibilities or obligations on the part of the LGUs? Hindi din po. It does not add to the duties and responsibilities of the LGUs under RA 9003. But it provides LGUs with an opportunity to enter into mutually beneficial partnerships with obliged enterprises, collectives, or PROs for the implementation of their EPR programs. And lastly, I think this is my last slide. Who is ultimately responsible and accountable for the veracity and accuracy of the plastic footprint recovery and diversion data generated from the EPR partnerships? Ultimately, these are the obliged enterprises. They are responsible to prepare and register their EPR programs, to implement their EPR programs. So it's up to them. The law gave the option to the obliged enterprises, collectives, or PROs kung kanino po sila makikipag-partner up for the effective implementation of this EPR program on their part. Otherwise, they will pay the fine under the inserted Section 49G of RA 9003. So with that, thank you very much for listening to this lecture. If you have further inquiries and questions, you may visit our website at emb.gov.ph or email us at epr@emb.gov.ph. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Attorney Ivy Joyce De Pedro. Thank you for enlightening us about the extended producer responsibility. You know, lagi namang problema yung implementation of the law. The law is useless if it cannot be implemented properly. So yes, let's talk about how we can help implement the law, although it's really the main primary responsibility of the government to make it known and to enforce it. Moving on, our final speaker currently leads the Zero Waste campaign at Greenpeace Philippines, which advocates for systemic changes within industries and environmentally sound institutional and public policies and programs to address the plastic pollution crisis. Her work involves strategic development, public engagement, and project management of campaigns related to plastic and waste issues. She also led the development of and advocacy for policies and upstream solutions, such as reuse and refill systems tailored for the Philippine context to reduce single-use plastic production, waste generation, and their associated impacts. She serves as the spokesperson for these Greenpeace campaigns. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Marian Ledesma. Hi, Marian. Good afternoon.
Kalikasan hapon.
Hello, magandang hapon sa lahat, and thank you for inviting me to present and talk about the Global Plastics Treaty. So allow me to share my screen. I hope everybody can see it. And
yes, we can see it.
Great. Let me just present. So hi everybody, I'm going to be talking about yung Global Plastics Treaty and the Philippines' engagement in this whole process for a legally binding instrument for plastic pollution. So what we're covering today, first yung resolution na nag-lead sa paggawa ng Global Plastics Treaty, the whole process that is working on developing this policy instrument. Then yung timeline, what we can expect in the next few years. Of course, yung mga players who's involved, who we should be looking out for, who we should be eyeing is either allies of the Philippines or allies of NGOs, and also yung elements of a treaty. So the different parts of the Plastics Treaty, what important areas we as NGOs should be focusing on, and also areas na still needs a lot of work, definitely, not just in terms of campaigning, but also in the technical side, the policy side. And since we are based in the Philippines, I decided to also present yung position ng Philippines in the most recent negotiations meeting, which was held a couple of months ago. And yung last are key demands for the Global Plastics Treaty. So we'll be looking at the more general na mga asks of for this legal instrument, but at the same time, ano yung kailangan natin i-demand rin of our government, what we would love to see to ensure that this treaty is as strong, as just, and as fair as possible to everyone involved, and also to ensure then that it is environmentally sound. So before we get started, I just wanted to show this video. Not sure if everybody can hear the sound.
There is no sound.
Is everybody able to hear the sound?
You have to share sound. Yun sa app, yung sa view option.
No sound.
Here, just give me one moment. Here we go.
Throughout the 1950s and 60s, driven by chemical manufacturers and fossil fuel producers, plastic became a ubiquitous and often inescapable part of our lives. In the decades that followed, we began to realize we were drowning in plastic. Plastics would never degrade or break down. They would leach chemicals into our air, land, and water systems. Microplastics would be found everywhere, from snow at the South Pole to blood in our bodies. We have been told that we can recycle our way to a plastic-free world, but this is a lie. The truth is that oil producers are working hand in hand with big brands to continue to push massive amounts of single-use plastic into the world. Greenpeace, along with our allies and supporters, is demanding a strong global treaty that will keep oil and gas in the ground and finally end the age of plastic.
So these are one of our main campaign calls, really, is that we want this plastic treaty to eventually lead to the decrease in dependence on fossil fuels. And of course, this ties in with a lot of other international efforts, particularly those with the climate talks. It also connects with other multilateral environmental agreements, gaya ng Basel Convention, which talks about the movement of hazardous waste. Also other environmental agreements like Convention on Biodiversity. These are things that are all interconnected as we look at the plastic pollution problem. It feeds into the climate crisis. It feeds into biodiversity and nature loss. So addressing one part of the problem, which is plastic pollution and its overproduction, will definitely be a key component of the Plastics Treaty and something that is necessary if we want it to be as ambitious as possible and also as effective as we want it. So yung beginning of the Plastics Treaty started years and years ago. And it led to the adoption of a resolution last year at UNEA 5.2. This resolution 5/14 is entitled to say that it's ending plastic pollution towards an international legally binding instrument. So this resolution essentially asks for UNEP to convene intergovernmental negotiating committee meetings And these series of meetings that will be held until 2024 is meant to develop this globally binding na instrument. And it doesn't just include plastic in the marine environment, although it specifically cites it's a resolution. What is great about this process is that it's taking on a comprehensive approach. It basically addresses the entire life cycle of plastic. And of course, yung nangyayari right now during the whole plastic treaty process is there is that chance to define what the life cycle of plastic really means. Yung understanding ng ibang countries is that, of course, to say the full life cycle of plastic means it begins with extraction of materials. Since 99% of plastics do come from fossil fuels, it makes sense to include extraction of those fossil fuels, refinement, petrochemical process. There are some countries na, of course, you would expect these oil-producing countries, they only want to talk about plastic, starting with the production of these items or these materials. But if we want one that's just and we want one that is circular and also environmentally sound, we can't talk about ending plastic pollution without also talking about ending this dependence on fossil fuels. So the timeline for the next 2 years is on the INC. So these negotiating committee meetings, since 2 have already been done. So yung simula ng entire process was back in UNEA 5.2. This was held in Kenya. And the resolution was adopted on the very last day, on March 2. It was this really great development when you look at it, because all of the member states of the UN agreed to have this treaty. Now, of course, there will be some countries that are less ambitious. There will be countries that are very ambitious, that they want to deal with the problem and are authentic about these intentions. And you can expect that merong countries that are sort of in the middle, hindi pa sila naka-decide which way they'll go, or they have more they're called more mid-ambition na countries, dahil they also want to consider some interests in plastic while also looking for more better environmentally sound approaches. Then of course, it's definitely a mixed bag, and we'll know more about the players and stakeholders in this process in a little bit. But after UNEA 5.2, naganap yung open-ended working group in May. I think it was end of May hanggang 1st of June. And during that whole week, it was really about looking at the procedure, more administrative and logistics. How would the process be done? How would the whole rules or procedural na mga issues be addressed? So the issue of rules and rules of procedure came up during the open-ended working group. So they tried to nail down different agreements on how decision-making would go. Unfortunately, a lot of countries were blocking essential elements, and they really couldn't come to an agreement about the rules of procedure for the Global Plastics Treaty process. So actually, until now, even as recent as INC2 in May, countries were still debating about how to go about this, how to decide on key decision areas, on agreeing on the elements that will be included in the treaty. So there's still that back and forth between more progressive countries and also countries that have interests in producing oil, making these plastics. Of course, we all know that countries that are producing oil, like Saudi Arabia, of course, they will be anti-ambition. They don't want anything that means that there will be a decrease in plastic production, and they're pushing hard on a lot of procedural issues, one of which we'll discuss later. But yeah, they don't want things like voting because that means that if it comes to a vote, they will be outnumbered because as it stands right now, there are a lot of progressive countries that want a decrease in plastic production overall. And there are also countries, of course, that are way more advanced. They want to see this be a really effective tool to address plastic pollution. So in the last two INCs, rules of procedure were being discussed alongside more substantive na discussion. So yung parang meat of the issue, yung content or yung laman ng global plastics treaty were also discussed. Of course, there were expected delays within both INC 1 and INC 2. As I mentioned, some countries were blocking voting mechanisms. Yung ibang countries were questioning, for example, why the EU was negotiating as a bloc. So they only had one negotiator for 27 countries, and that regional bloc essentially would vote as one. So question nila na there's only one representative for all these countries. Does that mean that they will only get one vote as opposed to 27 votes? Kasi with this process, if absent ka, definitely you won't get a chance to have a vote. So they're saying that if hindi makapapadala yung all 27 countries, then some of them will be missing out on decision making. So that's why there are countries like Brazil, India, Russia, I mentioned Saudi Arabia, that are questioning the EU's approach to this process. At the same time, they also don't want people to be able to vote. Countries to be able to, because then it will be their vote against a larger number of groups that want to cut down on production, for example. So what we can expect the next few months, there will be 3 other INCs, one in Kenya, the next one is in Canada, and yung last will be in the Republic of Korea. Between INC 3 and 4, merong UNEA, so it's a UN Environmental Assembly ulit. UNEA 6 will be happening in Kenya again. And what's going to happen at UNEA 6 is that they will be reporting on the progress of this treaty. Kung kamusta, will there need to be any changes in the process, possible extensions, and the way that the treaty or the resolution was written was expected na at the end of 2024, meron na tayong text na ready na for adoption and discussion at the diplomatic conference of plenipotentiaries, and that's in 2025. So yung sa 2025, essentially, it would be ideal na nandun na yung plastics treaty, ready na siya for adoption and signature ng mga countries that want to support it. Of course, this is probably one of the most ambitious na process in terms of timelines dahil 2 taon lang yung pagde-discuss talaga. They decided in 2022 and expect nila na dapat matatapos by 2024. While if you look at other mga processes sa mga environmental agreements, it takes years and years. Even getting to this resolution took several years, way longer than the whole process for developing the treaty itself. But it is a tight timeline and everybody wants to ensure that they make the deadline. So they will be extending the meetings before 1 week lang. In the next INCs, they are looking at more than 5 days of discussions, and then mag-extend possibly for longer yung INC 4 and INC 5 as needed. And what happens after 2025? I'm sure those of you that are familiar with environmental agreements, just because may adoption na doesn't mean it will enter into force, and doesn't mean that by 2025 meron na tayong plastics treaty. Matagal pa yung proseso ng pag-adopt, paghanap na to get enough signatures for it. And then there's also the process at a national level na bawat bansa kailangang i-ratify itong treaty na ito. So ratification and accession will still need to happen before this treaty enters into force. And now the ideal hope is that we get enough countries that will ratify right away. So within a year or so, it can already enter into force. Magdedepend rin yan sa decision kung ilang treaties yung needed for ratification to push through. For it to enter into force. So it could, for example, be maybe as low as 50 or 60. It can go as high as 90 plus, like with the Basel Band Amendment. I think it was 90 something. So magva-vary rin yun sa agreement na mangyayari. And again, that whole decision on pwede ba mag-vote yung certain countries a certain way will come into play. So the elements of the treaty, sa totoo lang, there's only the substantive elements, and then there's the implementation elements. But there are also additional sections and things like annexes that will make up the entire treaty document. So nilagay ko specifically na merong objective because I know it may seem like, well, it's such a small and simple thing, but the broad objective of the treaty still needs to be discussed in content, and then all of the countries have to agree on this main objective. Now, you might be wondering, nandun naman sa simula and plastic pollution, yan yung objective. Pero nagde-decide pa yung ibang countries on what that means, what is the scope of ending plastic pollution, and ultimately, what's the purpose? Are we protecting it just for the environment? Are we doing it to protect human health? Those are some of the elements that have to be agreed upon. And in a way, that objective will guide people or guide countries in how they interpret certain sections of this treaty and how they agree on the obligations, their requirements, the control measures of the treaty. Parang guiding principle siya. And for example, if you would look at the options that are being given for objectives na pinalabas ng UN earlier in the year, one talks about, for example, ending plastic pollution, so and so. Yung isang option is protecting human health and environmental health. And why is that important? Because if we're saying human health, that will have implications on plastic production, that will have implications on microplastics. All these different things can be translated to how you would approach protecting human health. So that's the objective part. The next part are the core obligations of all of the member states and yung control measures that will translate to these core obligations. So these parts of the treaty are prescribed actions, or they can also be voluntary measures for this approach to addressing plastic pollution. Now, there are several different core obligations that were suggested by the UN Secretariat, and they base this on the discussions that they've had in INC1, also in the positions that were sent in by the different countries, by NGOs, even by businesses. Nagsasubmit yung mga different entities na position or statements nila before each INC to help guide the UNEP Secretariat on how to send in all of these information, because it is a lot of information and parang kinoconsolidate nila. So they came up with 12 possible core obligations. Some of them work as a standalone, some of them complement each other, some of them will cancel each other out, like they can be redundant or parang paulit-ulit lang. So they can be combined as well. It really depends on the member states, what they agree on. And some of these examples are related to banning or phasing out primary plastic polymers, problematic plastic products or chemicals of concern. There's one specific core obligation for microplastics, one for waste management, meron rin on reuse, redesign, and then circularity. That's one example. Actually, also alternatives. That's one example of core obligations na baka pwedeng i-combine, because like circularity also mentions reuse or redesign. Alternatives can also be reuse and refill systems. So pwede yun isang core obligation nila. Another thing is, and it's also very important, is just transition. And then yung last is protecting human health. Then after all of these obligations, yung mga minamandate sa member states that will take part, merong means of implementation at saka implementation measures. So yung means of implementation, resources, policies, and actions ito that will implement the treaty. So kung ano yung napag-agrihan ng mga obligations, control measures, and voluntary approaches, this will require a more operative na series of text and provision to figure out how will they do it. Will it be done through financing mechanisms, those kinds of things. Implementation measures naman, national action plans. Will the body agree on a scientific and technical na cooperation na mechanism, those kinds of things. For means of implementation, it really is also touching on technological and capacity building. So how can developing countries achieve all of these requirements? Will there be common but differentiated responsibility? How can the more developed states capacitate developing countries? What will be the obligations, and figuring out the different ways to approach this treaty will definitely be a part of the implementation. And beyond that, meron yung mga annexes and lists. So these are just extra na parang additional information to guide the core obligations and also implementation sections. They can be lists of plastic products. It can be more information on the chemicals that are included in plastic items, or the chemicals included in plastic as a material. Those are examples of annexes and potential lists that can be added to the treaty. So players and groups. So aside from, of course, yung nandun na yung mga different governments, there are member states that are considered high and mid ambition, and then there are also member states that are low and anti-ambition. So I mentioned some of the ones na low or anti-ambition. A lot of them are oil-producing states, also countries that have interest in manufacturing or producing plastic. So mga production bases of petrochemical facilities, like India is one, especially here in Asia. It's one of the biggest countries that have a stake in ensuring that magko-continue yung pag-produce ng plastics. In other regions, you have Brazil, you also have Russia, and hindi mawawala doon sa usapan yung US, because they also have a lot of fossil fuel and petrochemical interests within their country. For high and mid ambition, some of the very ambitious ones are Norway, Peru, Rwanda, and actually yung nangunguna sa lead na magaganap yung UNEA na resolution to create the plastics treaty came from Peru and Rwanda. And the Philippines signed on to support that resolution. which led to this Global Plastics Treaty. So Peru and Rwanda have been consistent in being very progressive in their positions. Joining them, of course, are a lot of the European states. We're also seeing regional groups and political blocs. So aside from the EU, meron ring Africa group, which generally are very ambitious. There's also the Latin and Caribbean states. So yung GRULAC nandun, also small island developing states. And a lot of the Pacific small island developing states are very progressive in their positions. And you can really see how much they want this to work because a lot is at stake for these small island states. Then yung meron ring mga intergovernmental organizations like the ADB, IUCN, yung OPEC, OECD, they're there. But all of these groups that I'll be mentioning, aside from the country or member states, we're all just under one umbrella of being observers, even though my differentiation between them. So World Bank will also be there, representatives from the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm na convention. Nandun rin, Food and Agriculture Organization, WTO, are also there. And then there are the non-government organizations. Now, it's a bit funny because like in our context, pag sinasabi na NGO, it's non-profit organizations. Pero sa language ng UN, yung NGO are both non-profit organizations. So yung mga CSOs, and then there's also for-profit na mga companies. So nalump in tayo together with businesses in this whole process under that NGO umbrella. But yeah, so that's why it's really important to differentiate civil society groups and then also the business or industry representatives. And you're also going to see a sprinkling of NGO representatives and industry representatives or company representatives within the government na mga delegations. So this is all of the players and groups that are involved. Of course, there meron ring mga the academes there. We have scientists. There's actually a very good scientist coalition presence in the INCs. And as a network, we are working with them to try to push na talagang evidence-based yung Global Plastics Treaty na there is science and data backing and requiring all of these actions that will reduce plastic pollution right from production. And all of these scientific data is coming from different scientists or academics from all over the world. So this is something that was filmed and done in INC1 in Uruguay. So why this focus on health and fossil fuels? Yeah, again, because really at its root, plastic is the lifeline ng fossil fuel industry. Dahil marami ng climate commitments, a lot of governments are trying to move away from fossil fuels. They're looking at plastic as their way out. And that's why essential na titingnan natin yung buong life cycle ng plastic. And at the same time, there's more and more data about the harms of plastics and microplastics and the health risks that are pretty evident sa buong buhay ng isang piece of plastic. So what we would like to show is the Philippines' position at INC2. One of the things that really stood out to a lot of CSOs was that the Philippines gave the statement for the Asia Pacific group, and in that statement, representing a lot of countries from the Asian region, including the Middle East and East Asia, was that gusto nila yung consensus-based decision-making versus a voting mechanism. Now, consensus isn't essentially a bad thing. Of course, we want something that as much as possible, as many countries will be able to back this plastics treaty. Pero when it comes to decision making, it can mean that one country holds the entire plastic talks hostage dahil ayaw niya mag-agree to the decision. And since if we all say that it is consensus only, then talagang madedelay yung progress. It will cause a lot of issues. So that was one thing that stood out to CSOs, that the Philippines and also a lot of Asia Pacific countries were saying na gusto nila yung consensus only. Now, of course, when giving that statement, it doesn't mean that all of the Asian countries automatically agree. It was also a matter of the majority of the group saying that these are the things that we want to come out in the Asia AP statement. There are a lot of Pacific countries that are distancing themselves from that position. They also have other statements and other positions that they are putting forward. In the Philippine statement, they also noted that we are a minor producer of plastic. A lot of our plastic is imported. So pinopoint out yun nila. And of course, they recognize the rise in global plastic production. So it is great that the country is acknowledging that there is this rise of plastic production in the last few decades, and it is being driven by the demand for cheap, flexible packaging, such as single-use plastics. And the demand for plastics among various industries was also noted by the Philippine position. And all of this industry demand has led to the increase in plastic waste. So there is that very specific focus on plastic waste, yung Philippine position. But at the same time, it also highlights plastic production. So it also covers upstream. It did highlight yung existing laws natin, like RA 9003, which was, as we all heard earlier, amended by the EPR Act. And it really wants to push the model of EPR in being utilized for the plastics treaty process if EPR were to be included. And the country position also stated how downstream measures really aren't enough. Kailangan rin yung upstream efforts, and there needs to be a global na comprehensive life cycle approach when we're addressing plastic pollution. And ninunote ko lang that they do talk about transboundary na plastic pollution because we are a recipient of waste trade, or we are a participant in waste trade, often receiving a lot of waste from more wealthier countries. So nabibring up yan ng Philippine delegation during the talks. It also highlights that there needs to be binding rules for EPR, basically a global framework for EPR. How will it be done? Ano yung EPR scheme na pwedeng gawin, whether that's our EPR framework or the framework being used in other regions of the world, like the EU has EPR, where talagang nagbabayad directly to the public or the government, yung mga countries, or they pay certain fees for their plastic pollution or their plastic production. There's also a call for targets and deadlines for reducing plastic waste production. Again, it does focus downstream on plastic waste. But of course, this can be complemented by saying, well, how can we reduce plastic waste production? Well, that can be done by reducing overall plastic production or embracing reuse and refill systems. Then it also tries to advocate for information disclosures or transparency when it comes to the chemicals in certain plastics, or the chemicals additives that are being added to plastic materials to make them have certain characteristics. It also wants to provide consumers with as much information as possible para they can make their own informed decision about utilizing plastics or refusing plastic materials. Another point that the Philippines made is that they do want to incentivize innovation and investment in research and development so that countries will be able to find sustainable alternatives, sustainable approaches, or shifts that will allow us to move away from plastics or have more better alternatives. And then yung last thing was that they did talk about transboundary plastic pollution. And one of the binding rules that they called for was to regulate yung plastic waste trade between countries and essentially stop the exportation of plastic waste to nations that don't have the capacity to manage these plastic waste properly. So there are instances, of course, where waste trade is necessary. For example, in small island developing states na wala talagang waste management infrastructure, they do have to send it to countries like New Zealand and Australia. Now, that's a just approach to how it's done, but generally waste trade is an unjust trade because yung nangyayari is that it's richer countries that can afford to ship their waste that are sending them to mid to low income countries. For example, like the Philippines, like Indonesia and Malaysia, na nagre-receive ng waste, and what happens is that these wastes aren't managed properly. They're burned in communities or they're just dumped in our own landfills. So nagdadagdag lang ng burden for the receiving states. So the gist of all of this is that the Philippines is looking for different kinds of support for the country. And rightfully so, since we are, again, receiving a lot of waste. And at the same time, the creation of this whole problem didn't start from the Philippines. It started in the countries that developed plastic and then decided to allow their corporations to peddle single-use plastic packaging and really force the usage of plastic sachets, flexible packaging in developing countries. Then another thing is that it does tend to be more downstream focused. There isn't an inclination yet to reduce plastic production or restrict certain types of plastic, but it's early days yet, and hopefully with more engagement, the government will be able to embrace more, even more ambitious na mga provisions. So some of the government hopes is that they look at this treaty, this was in their statement, that it is an opportunity for the country to become a leader in sustainable practices and innovation. And as Colleen showed earlier, marami na examples of great ways that or innovations that are happening in the country. It will also enable implementation and action that wouldn't have been doable for individual countries or more smaller states. And they hope that this treaty benefits developing countries that, again, are usually dealing with the brunt of the problem, and then providing whether that's direct fiscal support or non-fiscal support, then like technology transfer, capacity building, those kinds of things in order to implement yung obligations or control measures. And it's great to see that yung Philippine position does highlight a just transition to a circular economy and yung environmentally sound waste management practices. And it also looks at this whole process as a chance to generate new opportunities on new markets. And it highlights, again, yung common but differentiated responsibility. So what are the demands that CSOs have for a plastics treaty? I'll be sharing this video from the Story of Stop the Project to talk about the Global Plastics Treaty and 3 things that we would want in general, whether it's coming from the Philippines or all of the member states.
What do Exxon, Greenpeace, and Rwanda have in common? The answer might surprise you. A lot of people don't know this, but right now, 175 countries are negotiating a treaty to solve plastic pollution. And there are a lot of players in the room. Let's break it down. We all know about the plastic problem at this point. It's a problem so big that no country alone can solve it. So last year, global talks began to forge an international plastics treaty. It's a big deal, but an even bigger deal is that countries agreed it'll be legally binding. That means if governments don't abide by it, there could be actual consequences. And now, world leaders are meeting periodically to negotiate the terms of the agreement. But the devil's in the details, and this is where you're going to come in, so pay attention. We need a plastics treaty that, 1, has deadlines to slash plastic production. Ending the cycle of plastic pollution for good requires getting to the root of the problem by cutting plastic production. See, the plastics crisis is fundamentally a crisis of volume. There's so much plastic being created right now that it's just totally unmanageable. Basically, if you've got an overflowing bathtub, don't bail it out with a teaspoon, turn off the faucet. 2, we need a plastics treaty that advances environmental justice. We need this treaty to prioritize the health, livelihoods, and expertise of communities and workers all along the plastic supply chain. Look, we know plastic harms people. The fossil fuels and chemicals it's made of are toxic, and they pollute our air, our water, our food, and even our bodies. So those most impacted, whether they live next to an ethane cracker in Pennsylvania or work as a waste picker in the Philippines, need to be at the decision-making table. Number 3, we need a treaty that rejects false solutions. Major polluters like Exxon are lobbying for a weaker treaty. But why are the companies that created the problem even allowed in the room in the first place? And the things the industry is pushing, like what they call advanced recycling or plastic offsets or more beach cleanups, those are not real solutions. They're just greenwashing tactics that let industry keep making more plastic. With negotiations underway, we need to build enough public pressure around the world to make sure the treaty is strong enough to solve the problem. And we need to keep certain companies and countries from getting in the way. The good news is, many countries are advocating for strong terms. Let's call them the High Ambition Coalition. Nations like Rwanda and Ecuador and Norway and Peru, they're leading the way. Other countries, not so much. Some of the world's most powerful countries, like the US, where I live, and Saudi Arabia, they're resistant to passing a strong treaty because they're the major producers of either plastic or the fossil fuels that plastics are made of. So this is where you come in. If you've felt helpless or like my individual actions can only do so much, this is the opportunity for the major sweeping changes that we've been waiting for. But world leaders need to hear from us. We need participation from people like you and me to make sure we're drowning out corporate lobbying and getting the strongest possible plastics treaty we can. So what kind of treaty will the citizens of the Earth get? The one we fight for.
So that's really the essence of what needs to happen, is that governments need to hear from civil society, individuals, consumers about their demands and how the plastic pollution crisis is impacted them or their communities, their health, or the environment or ecosystems that they depend on for their food, or para sa tubig nila, para sa mga hanap buhay nila. And essentially what we would want is that it has to come down to reducing plastic production. Because of the plastic life cycle impacts, we have to start by preventing plastic pollution right at its root from the very beginning. And there must be a global plastic polymer production na reduction target. Hindi lang pwede na masasabi sila na, okay, we're just going to reduce production. It's just going to be a line there. Walang guidelines about how much and by when they should do it. So there has to be clear targets about this phase out. And then we have to phase out certain plastic polymers when possible. And there could be polymer groups that that are listed there. Of course, nagpo-push back yung mga countries, some countries that are producing plastics or heavy into production, because it does mean a loss in their business. But at the same time, meron namang alternatives to plastic kasi alternative methods and approaches such as the zero waste hierarchy, which talks about reduction, reuse, and redesign, that does translate to more jobs for people. Because the way reuse and refill systems have been designed is that they are a bit more labor intensive, but at the same time, that's also good because it creates more and more jobs and a lot more people can participate in that economy. And it really leads to a zero waste in a system. And on a global average, as we've seen, the per capita consumption of plastics does need to be reduced by 75% by 2050 if we're to meet yung Paris Agreement na objectives. And it seems like a huge number, staggering, like, paano to gagawin? How can we imagine a world with 75% less plastics? Well, it is doable. There are roadmaps for it. And the great thing about this process is there are so many stakeholders involved that we can develop this roadmap of how to do the phase out, which areas we can prioritize, such as the medical industry, so that we can figure out other industries that have to get rid of plastic, so that more essential na mga applications of plastic can be applied. And then ultimately, we want to phase out virgin plastic production, na yung ano na lang, yung maiiwan na lang for the production process are just cycled and cycled na mga old plastics. But it's not going to happen right away, and definitely recycling isn't the sole solution. We really have to adapt to better systems, babaguhin talaga the way we're living, the way businesses do their operations, so that we won't have to get to this projection of 1.2 billion tons in 2060. Ngayon, we're at 400 million tons plus, and we shouldn't have to go beyond 500 million if we can start to figure out changes in the way big corporations are doing their business. Another key demand for government is also phasing out of harmful chemicals and products. There have been studies by networks like IPEN, which show that there are more than 13,000 chemicals that are being used in plastic, and over 3,000 of them are considered hazardous, whether they're toxic or persistent sila in such a way na hindi mawawala at all. They have a lot of implications on our health, and that's why they are in one way or another called hazardous. And even though there's 3,000 of them, sadly, only 4% are being regulated globally. So what needs to happen with this treaty is that we start phasing out groups of chemicals that are problematic. And it has to be groups, hindi pwede na specific chemicals, kasi yung nangyayari sometimes, if it's one kind of chemical, they'll make slight alterations to the chemical composition, and then problematic pa rin or hazardous pa rin in a way. There's just one slight difference that makes it a new chemical. So they really have to attack it as a whole chemical group to avoid any future problems with alternatives or replacements. Another thing is there has to be this recognition that plastic as a material is a mix of as a complex mix of different chemicals. And it needs to be simplified para ma-address natin to. At the same time, we should be looking at how overproduction is currently happening. So if sobrang complicated ng plastic na material, it means that overproduction will also have risks of contaminating other safer plastics or other safer materials. There's also a lot of health impacts in that production process, and it leads to further marginalization of affected groups. And then when it comes to products naman, there should be legally binding targets to phase out all non-essential plastic applications by a specific date. Now, what non-essential means? Essential use needs to be clearly defined in other multilateral agreements. For example, sa Montreal Protocol, they define essential use as for utilizing certain substances for lab analysis. So very specific siya. And that's what needs to happen for the definition of essential use for plastics. And we should be starting with the most problematic products. So single-use products, single-use packaging, particularly sachets that have been very problematic, walang value for waste pickers, and essentially hindi recyclable. So they should be starting with that. The criteria for problematic plastic should apply to flexible plastics and complex multi-layered packaging, again, like sachets. So, and we also don't want to say that, oh, we'll phase out these plastics based on the idea na may alternatives na. So we shouldn't be basing it on existing and economically viable alternatives. It should allow for the most progressive targets, the most ambitious targets. And then from there, it will trigger or motivate people to innovate and find these alternatives. Instead of just saying, well, we don't have it right now, so hindi natin ito gagawin. You can't start by saying na eto lang yung kaya. You really have to force these countries to aim for what's doable in the future and not just what's doable now. And as I said, supporting voting or supporting voting mechanism, the Philippines really needs to push for a voting mechanism because it allows smaller countries or countries na less powerful, less influential, to have a say in the discussion and have a right to determine their participation and to determine what kinds of provisions are included in this treaty. Hindi pwede na one country, big country like the US will say, well, we don't want this provision, and then madederail yung buong progress ng treaty. A voting mechanism will only come into play if consensus can't be reached. So consensus for yung target ultimately, and then if hindi lang talaga maaabot yung agreement of all, if all efforts for consensus have been exhausted, then that's when voting comes into play. And it enables all of these states for ambitious provisions and again prevents countries from watering down the plastics treaty or delaying the progress. If you were following the discussions in INC2, you can see how only a handful of states, like 5 countries, are blocking the negotiations. It halts the entire talks for that week. And it actually led to a delay of 2.5 days in the last INC. And yeah, if consensus only siya, again, it will threaten efforts to introduce measures to reduce plastic production or ban short-lived plastics or single-use plastics. If you look at other very successful na multilateral environmental agreements, and also other policy instruments na successful, like the Montreal Protocol or yung Convention on Tobacco Control, then you'll see that these either have voting only, actually, or a voting mechanism in case consensus isn't reached. So this stunted ambition, blocking of one country. The opposite side naman nakikita natin sa climate talks na it is problematic kapag walang voting dahil binablock ito na nagbablock yung isang country from all of the talks moving forward. And yeah, the very clear example of that are the climate talks, which are consensus only. So that's it. If you have any questions, you can reach out through email or on LinkedIn. And I would like to invite everybody to support calls for a reuse revolution by going to act.gp/reuse revolution.
Thank you, Marian, for that very interesting discussion. Napakadami, no? Parang ang dami-dami nating kailangan gawin talaga. And it's no, a problem not only of the Philippines, pero most especially those who are actually producing these plastics. No? Dapat sila yung magtino. Kumbaga, no, Marie?
Yeah, it's a global headache, gigantic global headache. So, kasi nga, gigantic global headache, kaya medyo may problema tayo sa next portion. Pero before that, I think we need to have a
group photo muna tayo.
Yeah, go ahead, do the honors.
Okay, before we proceed, friends ng ating environment, let's have our group photo first, Mabet. We are asking everyone to open their video if it's available for the group photo.
Yes. Thank you, Sir David. Okay, po. Kindly open your cam.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Any more? Waiting for the make it simple. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Maraming salamat.
I was saying, David, that a big headache deserves a big discussion. So we have gone over time about nearly an hour. So this is going to affect our open forum. I would like to ask our participants, is it okay with you to go over time? It's okay with us. Can you put out that can you do the thumbs up? Yeah, so that we will know how many questions we can accommodate.
Until 5:30.
Overtime, hinihingi ng overtime.
No, that's too much. I mean, this is, we need to, madaming questions pagkatapos. I expect that there will be a lot of questions kasi ang very rich yung discussion, no? And the problem is so huge. So I expect a lot of questions, which means that we need time to get that answered.
Kasi 5:30 naman yung ating ending, so siguro around.
Yeah, but that leaves us only 30 minutes for question and answer plus the closing segment. So meron pa tayong mga announcements, meron pa. So we really are going to go over time unless there are few questions lang, no? So anyway, let's start na nga with the questions. We open the open forum na.
Konting reminders and guidelines po sa ating open forum. Una, to ask questions or share a comment, you may either raise your hand or verbalize or post your question or comment on the chat box and we will read them for you. Please unmute your microphone as soon as your name is called and then give your name, organization, school or location, then state your question and to whom it is directed. We will take as many questions as time permits on a first come, first served basis. Addition lang to, Maria, please be direct to the point.
Right. Right.
So,
kasi huwag na tayong pahabain kasi wala na tayong time. Okay, who will ask the first question? Maria Cristina, I see Maria Cristina Bawagan. Tina Bawagan.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Tina Bawagan. I am a retired teacher of the Philippine Science High School. and I used to head the EPWM committee, and I'm very interested in the topic. Now I understand that reducing production of plastics is the best way to solve the problem. However, in the short term, I know that Quezon City is collecting broken glass, and I wrote it in the chat, broken glass and single-use plastics, etc. I think they use that when they build roads, etc. So now we do have large bins in our home, and I also encourage Philippine Science to do that as well, although I'm retired, for all these items, which were used normally or formerly considered as residuals. And however, our Barangay Socorro, does not collect. But there is a program, the BEST, I don't know if you've heard of it, BEST Technologies. They used to collect, but then they left. So now we have to deliver this every time the bins are filled to Quezon City. And how can we expect people of the barangays to go to Quezon City just to deliver? Mabuti kung may kotse lahat, wala naman. Ang sabi sa Quezon City, that's the problem because the law is not observed. Yung materials recovery facilities, non-existent sa mga barangays. And much less this collection of what were formerly considered as residuals, like single-use plastics. So I don't know how this can be addressed by the group or what.
Ina, may I ask, who are you, who is your question directed to?
To any of the speakers.
Okay. Okay, will anyone come forward, any of the resource speakers, to answer Tina's question? Who do we have? Meron bang sasagot nun? Ang problema kasi yung non-implementation of 9003 eh.
Yes,
Sabi
because
nga, nagsabi nga sa akin, parang ang gaganda ng batas natin, pero
lagi naman, kulang sa enforcement. So, wala bang sasagot? Parang wala eh. Parang walang gustong sumagot.
ENR mentioned that there is a law requiring the local barangays to have a materials recovery facility.
Yes.
But if there is none, how are they supposed to? I mean, parang wala namang parusa. They just get away with it.
Marian, do you want to answer?
Yeah, although I guess DNR would be more well versed in this, I would say that there is an existing law, yung RA 9003 does mandate that barangays have these MRF, so material recovery facilities. And yeah, there are penalties for this for the local government. And if they aren't implementing this, I think right now there are administrative penalties that can be considered, or administrative approaches under under RA 9003 that citizens can look into. Yeah, yun lang yung problem is that not all barangays have the capacity to do it or the resources to do it. So it also has to be binabalanse rin kasi not all LGUs have that kind of support. I'll pass it on to DNR case.
Oh, Attorney Ivy.
Actually, statistically wise, we have around 42,000 barangays all throughout the country. And not all of those, I think around 16,000 lang ang may MRFs sa Philippines. And still a lot of barangays are sharing at wala rin, yung iba talaga totally walang mga MRF. So that is a problem in implementation. And of course, Nasa ano naman po yan, RA 9003. Original mandate of RA 9003 is that every barangay should have an MRF. Now, it will now be the problem of the Quezon City government on how to handle that. Anyway, meron din naman silang mga solid waste management plan to be submitted to the National Solid Waste Management Commission, taking note of those problem areas sa kanilang constituents. And yun nga po, in RA 9003, the citizens could take a look as well doon sa mga possible na administrative sanctions kung magko-complain kayo ng inyong mga LGUs. Yun lang po.
Okay, I see raised hand by Inday Beroya.
Bago
Yeah,
kay,
I'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, sige po. Inday, sige,
Go ahead, Inday.
Yeah. Number one, the budget of every barangay allocates about 10%. The annual budget allocates about 10% for waste management, cleanliness and sanitation, whatever the name goes by. In Quezon City, there's a solid waste management board, and their problem is getting the barangays to do it. But then, I was in that solid waste board until last year, and to my surprise, they even increased the number of collection. Kasi segregated collection will promote segregation. And then madaling-dalin sa barangay. But they didn't do it. In fact, before elections, they increased the collection to every day. So I think it's really a case of intention, no? Of will, the decision to really do it. So like yung solid waste board nila, they try, pero parang they're more administrative. And they even ask for our help to go barangay for barangay to implement this. Aware sila that there are barangays that don't do this, but they don't also do things to implement it. During one administration, our organization worked with the ombudsman to file cases on non-compliance. And we were able to file 5 cases. So there is really a law, and it's the enforcement that is the problem.
Thank you, Inday.
Yeah, Marie, may
Yes,
I?
Tessa.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tessa.
Yeah, in our subdivision, what we did was we organized everyone and designated a day when a collection will be done, when we contacted Quezon City to do the collection of the recyclables. Maybe that can be done by groups, NGOs in the barangays. They can organize their barangays, set a date, and then contact Quezon City when they can collect all the recyclables. So that's one way. You don't have to bring it individually, but they will go to you and schedule the collection. Okay, that's just one practical solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Grabe. Ito namin, kailangan pang citizens action talaga kahit na may law. And,
pero Marie, the feedback lang kasi when I go all over the Philippines last year, no, I asked some of the barangays bakit nagiging tambakan yung MRF nila. And the reason that some of them are saying na talagang kulang sila sa pondo, so sa funding, sa support, kasi yung taxes na nanggagaling and budget, very limited lang. So I think isa rin sa
Sorry, there's a mandated amount for waste management. It's mandated by law. Hindi mo pwedeng gastusin for anything else.
Yeah, so
I was treasurer for a long time. Also, kung pera ang problema, there was no law when Blue Ridge started our MRF. And from our MRF, we generated the sweldo.
That's right. You generate a lot of revenue from an MRF. Yes, I've experienced that from
the funding is mandated.
Barangays that we trained. Yeah.
I'll give you an example of a budget. Diyan sa may Bagong Bayan, the budget is 30 million. What is 10% of 30 million a year? Hindi ka makaka-MRF with 3 million a year. It's a mandated thing. The budget is fixed. The items are fixed.
Yes. So, excuse lang nila yung walang pondo. Lagi namang
But
excuse
not all
yun.
of the barangays have
Lack of
millions of
will
Not
more
all
than lack of
barangays have.
pondo, I think.
Ang Blue Ridge, wala kaming pera as in zero kasi there was no law yet. So out of
Yeah.
pocket lang kami. And we made it work. So when finally there was a law, our budget was 1,000,000 to 300,000 a year. We were able to make it work.
Yeah.
Sweldo nila, infrastructure, tracking. Oh.
Okay, next question. Let's move on. Baka meron pang ibang questions on the treaty, on the
Dr. Galang, I think is
EPR. Dr. Galang, yes. Yes, Nina, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, thank you to our very good speakers who gave us the updates on this issue. Number one, I take it we are among the high ambitious countries, which our last speaker was talking about. There are the low ambitious and the high ambitious. Are we among the high ambitious? She sounded like we are. Number two, are there government people in our panel that go to these negotiations? Number three, I can't help but think that this issue is complementary to our recent topic, which is making the West Philippine Sea a peace zone. Why am I connecting it? Because our speaker said the low ambitious countries are those which are oil producing. It's only natural, right? That they will resist ambition. And if we continue to our bid to dig for or to extract oil from our seas, then we will be an oil producing country, and this will be contra to our ambition of first lowering climate change, and second, maybe the allied issue is producing petrochemicals, which will produce plastics.
Yeah.
So I hope that in your campaign, you can also strongly campaign again for making the West Philippine Sea a peace zone, which means protecting its biodiversity and protecting it from extractive industries, especially oil. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Marianne, you have something to say?
Yeah, so with regards to that question about the Philippines' ambitions, we can't say that it is one of the high ambition countries at the moment, but
Norway,
it can be
right?
one of those. Yeah, but it can be one of those. Definitely, it's still one of those that are being considered by CSOs as in the middle. But there's this huge potential for the country to be that leader in the Southeast Asia region. Dahil there are other equally na mga larger Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia or Indonesia that are less ambitious just because of their oil or petrochemical interests in those countries. So the Philippines could sort of go towards the position ng Thailand or and really balance out the influence in the region. At the same time, merong DENR is actually leading the delegations there. Sir Albert from DENR isn't here, but he is the lead negotiator for the Philippine delegations, and he belongs to EMD rin. Among the other delegation representatives of Philippines, yung DFA nandun, nagpa-participate din sa process to support DENR. And there are other NGOs that are also there. So I was one of the Greenpeace na delegates. Unfortunately, NGOs are only limited to 5 slots per organization. So medyo there's a clear lack of civil society representation and representation rin ng mga affected communities. Limitado rin dahil sa 5-slot maximum na UNEP.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? I don't see. I went through the gallery and there are no raised hands, but there is a question in the chat box. David, can you read it?
Hindi ko kasi mabasa, naka-ano ako, naka-mobile phone, so gagano lang ako.
Oh, okay.
Mabasa ko siya. So.
Now I have to read it, right? But my eyes
ito
are
lang
not so good. Okay. This is a question to Miss Ledesma. I think there is a bioplastic made up purely of cassava or yam starch used for disposable cutlery, which would then be fully degradable. I wonder why this solution has not been pushed. That is a question from Harry Bon. Carmelita.
Yeah, bioplastics are being considered among the alternatives. Greenpeace and a lot of Break Free from Plastic movement na mga organizations don't endorse this though as a solution because there are some concerns about this. For example, doing bio-based plastics that are still disposable in nature, they still compete with usage of resources. So for example, it competes with food production dahil what plants would have been grown to feed people are now being shifted to crops that will be used for plastics. So nangyari rin yan sa soy, for example, and it also happened with biofuels. That's the danger between when shifting to an alternative pero disposable pa rin. And it's also a problem, for example, with paper alternatives dahil with the amount of consumption that's happening, yung demand in our system of just throwing away, basically disposable yung mga materials, it will result in using up a lot of resources. It also leads to a lot of water use to create all of these bio-based na mga plastics. And in the Philippines, there really isn't a lot of viable facilities to produce it, because bioplastics, they require specialized facilities. So some bioplastics may naturally degrade. Other bioplastics falling under that whole bioplastics na label, minsan fossil fuels pa rin sila. So nagbe-break down lang ito microplastics. Kung bio-based naman na plant-based talaga na bioplastics, they still need industrial grade na mga composting facilities, which I don't think are here in the Philippines yet. So if mag-shift tayo na walang facilities to do it, they still will end up in our landfills.
Okay. Last question goes to Tessa. She's raising her hand. Tessa?
Yeah, actually, I have a question for Attorney Ivy. Because the EPR is only for large companies, but those SMEs that will be using some of their products will also be included, I think, dun sa law ng EPR law. Can you give a concrete example ng how this can be implemented? Ano ba ang SME na that will somehow be using also under this EPR connected to big companies?
Thank you po. So again, ang ating pong covered ng EPR Act ay yung mga may 100 million pataas na assets. So wala nang question dyan. As long as they are generating plastic packaging wastes, they are covered under the EPR. But the law explicitly exempted those MSMEs from the coverage of the law, but they are highly encouraged to implement EPR. Should they transition to become a large enterprise in the future, kaya na po nila. Example doon yung mga hindi naman ganun kalalaking industries. Kasi if you take a look at the figure, malaki talaga yung 100 million. So for example, yung mga 60 million na companies yan, they are encouraged to participate in the EPR implementation. Yun nga rin po yung isa sa mga loopholes nung tayo ay nagsasagawa ng mga public consultations, na kapag in-aggregate din kasi yung mga wastes coming from MSMEs, no, talagang malaki rin yung na-generate nila. However, on the part of the implementer, kami po sa DENR, we just need to implement what the law states. And since the law states that it is only the large enterprises with the exemption of the MSMEs, but they are highly encouraged, so we are going to go after the large enterprises as soon as there are may compliance monitoring na po kami. So large enterprises po yung uunahin talaga namin, and yung mga, in fairness naman sa mga, meron din naman pong mga nagre-register na mga below 100 million yung assets nila. And in fairness as well, doon sa ibang large enterprises na may mga suppliers sila na mga MSMEs, minsan ginagawa rin nilang requirement sa contract nila na mag-register din muna kayo sa NEC ng inyong mga EPR program bago namin i-renew yung kontrata namin sa inyo. In fairness, meron din pong mga ganong efforts on the part of our large enterprises to do that. Kaya doon po sa aming ginagawang registry, marami din po, hindi ko sure kung more, around half ang doon sa binigay kong figure kanina, mga voluntary MSMEs po sila. Kaya ano rin po, aware din po ang ating ilan sa mga MSMEs that they need to implement EPR programs.
Okay, thank you.
That's good. Thank you very much. We have to move on now, David. So before we give the floor to our last speaker today,
Okay.
David and I have some brief but important announcements. On the evaluation, first, the GC Secretariat will share a link to an evaluation form for today's Kamayan Forum sessions in the chat box. The link will also be flashed on screen. Please take time to give us your feedback to help us improve the forum. Dave?
Remember that for those who want to have an e-certificate, you need to accomplish the evaluation form, okay? The participant must have been actually present in the forum, and the participant must submit a duly accomplished evaluation form. I hope that form will be on our chat box, so please click the link that will be provided in the chat box, and so that we can send you the e-certificate.
Okay, we would also like to invite you to visit the Ako Ang Bukas website and try our greenhouse gas emissions calculator, so you can find out how much you are dirtying the environment, the earth, how heavy is your greenhouse gas footprint. Okay, and then lastly, if you wish to join Green Convergence, I think the Secretariat will also put a link in the chat box for you to fill up a form. So that's it. David?
Yeah, mga kalikasang araw po sa inyo. Tandaan po natin, no, as a piece of reminder, no, sabi nga ni Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Wag nating intayin, no, na yung ibang tao yung kumilos.
Bakit parang nagpa-parting shots ka na?
Simulan natin. Hindi, kasi simulan natin. Kasi baka makalimutan ko eh. Pumasok sa isip, kailangan natin simulan.
Nagpa-parting shots ka na eh.
Diba? Kasi pag hindi natin sinimulan, pag hindi tayo nagsimula sa ating sarili, at inintay natin na ibang tao kumilos, itong plastic na ito, kahit sa environment, sa kaibigan, masama eh. Kaya beat natin, talunin natin ang plastic pollution.
Okay, do the honors to introduce our last speaker, please.
Ano pa ba?
Yes, we are in our closing segment. Okay.
Yeah. Let's have the closing remarks, no? For this today's Kamayan Forum. Naka-highlight kasi ng puti. Sorry naman, naka-highlight siya ng puti.
Sabi ko na nga, nagpa-parting shots ka na eh.
Naka-highlight kasi ng puti. Pero my sincerest apologies dahil alam niyo naman, apat na yung ano natin, hindi pa rin natin nakita, pero hindi po natin yung sinasagot. To close today's Kamayan Forum, may we welcome one of the Board of Directors of Green Convergence, Ma'am Inday Beroy.
Okay, good afternoon again. This afternoon, as I was listening to the speakers, I was very impressed with the presentation. Very thorough and very well researched. So thank you, Eileen, for giving us the situation in the Philippines of waste management and how we manage our plastic. Of course, the end message is the same message that we've been working on for the past 30 years. No? We need to work harder, and implementation is the problem. For me, the second speaker, Attorney Ivy De Vega, De Pedro, she it was a very happy news to me, that there is, even if it only applies to big corporations, there is an extended food producer's responsibility. It exists, we can use it. And it should, of course, I think the implementation that she's talking about is from the government side, that will always need the push of civil society people like us. The last one is on an international level. So we have the community level, we have the government side and the business side, and then the international level. It's a good news, it's happy news that people are talking about it, and the different countries want to put their heads together towards working on solutions and agreeing on the solution. Although I had noticed in my, I was watching, it's a lot of future things, it's a lot of hope. So we of course we hope now, and in the end, the same thing was running in my mind: implementation. When we started zero waste in Blue Ridge, there was no law, and we started the law after that. But what I'm saying is, it can be done if we want to do it. Kasi nature does not need us. We're just trying to take our place in the planet, and nature can regenerate itself. It's us who put the indigestible things into nature. Nature doesn't need us. Walang basura kung walang tao. Pero kung maraming tao, mas maraming basura. So tayo yon. The solution lies with us. And hope springs eternal because I saw so many young faces and they were so earnest. These are the faces of our speakers. Even Marian was so young and earnest. Everyone was so young and earnest. So for me, let's keep trying, let's keep hoping. And let's hope that more people, more young people will take up the cudgels. God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Inday. Talagang 30 years na.
30 years.
I know.
Si Tita Luz, 1960s pa.
Yeah, and when you look at these young people, it really gives you hope that this is not going to die, and maybe we will see its completion in our lifetime, di ba? So, yan sana ang mangyari. Thank you very much to our beautiful, to our wonderful, to our what's the energetic and knowledgeable speakers. Ang gagaling nyo. I'm so happy. We were so fortunate to have you. Thank you very much to the participants for staying on, and we will see you again next month. The next Kamayan is on August 18. Mark your calendars, and sana nga talaga mawala na yung plastic, pati mga plastic na tao. Okay, Dave, I think, do you want to add to your parting shot?
Yun lang kasi. Siguro ang kailangan din natin tandaan na we should also act on the law. So yung ating mga local government na hindi nag-i-implement ng solid waste management, i-petition natin talaga. Magreklamo tayo. Kasi pag hindi tayo nagreklamo, gagawin nila yan. Sabi niya I remember when I attended, siguro nung may buhok pa ako, no, Marie? Nag-attend sa waste management, sabi, bakit kaya walang nakakasuhan na administrative case? Kasi walang yung nagre-reklamo, wala tayong lakas ng loob. So magkaroon tayong lakas ng loob. Simulan sa sarili at i-petition natin yung mga taong dapat ay nangunguna sa pag-i-implement. Yan, thank you everyone. Medyo napaka-overtime pero I hope napakaganda naman ng ating discussion. Fruitful, and again, it's time to beat the plastic pollution.
Di naman tayo sobrang overtime. Actually, we managed to trim down kasi konti lang yung questions. Okay, so alam mo, meron pa akong gustong sabihin pala. Naalala ko lang, yung advent of online shopping, ang laking problema sa plastic. Maybe we should have a special law on that, or kasi do you know,
Magandang
you
discussion
order
yan.
one little thing, pagkatapos babalutin nila ng bubble wrap na ang dami-dami yung kapal-kapal, tapos ilalagay sa loob ng plastic bag na plain. Pagkatapos yung plain plastic bag ilalagay pa sa plastic bag ng online shopping na may sign nila, may address, may lahat. So ang dami-dami, you know, when you unbox something, parang wow, you create so much plastic waste for such a small thing. So sa bahay lang namin nangyayari yan. So na-scandalize ako.
It starts from the seller, no? Kasi ako, I have the tindahan ng Kalikasan. Siguro last year nga rin. Sabi nga ng mga anak ko, bakit kaya napakahirap ng packaging, ang tagal mo naghahanap? Kasi ultimong the packaging, hindi ako nagbabubble wrap, yung parang bis na alternate sa bubble wrap, tapos naka-paper sa lahat na recyclable. So it's the seller eh. It has to be a mindset of the seller. Kailangan natin
Okay.
klarasahin din sa kanila yan.
Yeah, we'll
We
talk
can
about
do it
that.
if we want.
Siguro
Diba?
we can talk to the Lazada, Shopee, and other, you know, I don't know how to do it, pero we need to do something about it.
Yes.
So with that, I say goodbye, everyone. Have a beautiful weekend and see you next month.
Ingat po kayo and God bless everyone. Maraming salamat.
Bye. Thank you.